Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says his embattled nation is ready to continue shipping grain despite Russia's exit from the deal that guaranteed the safety of ships passing through the Black Sea. Moscow's decision has drawn sharp criticism from world leaders who accuse Vladimir Putin of, quote, weaponizing food. Hours after the announcement, the Ukrainian port city of Odessa, from which grain is shipped, came under attack from Russian drones, resulting in the damage to the port infrastructure facilities.
Loaded with Ukrainian grain, this ship was the last to leave the country before Russia pulled the pin on a crucial wartime deal. The year-long pact had allowed safe passage of exports through the Black Sea. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky insisted this must not be the end. The Black Sea Grain Initiative can and should be kept operating. If without Russia, then so be it. The agreement on the export of grain is one between Turkey and the United Nations, and that remains valid. The only thing that is needed is a careful implementation and decisive pressure from the world on the terrorist state. The agreement helped lower global food prices and ensured vital supplies of wheat and maize made it to parts of Africa. With the deal off, there are concerns about international food security. The Kremlin blamed its withdrawal on unmet demands to improve conditions for its own grain and fertilizer exports. Despite complaints over restrictions, Russia shipped record amounts of wheat since last year. The UN says it's presented Russia with options to keep the grain deal alive, but without success.
Ultimately, participation in these agreements is a choice, but struggling people everywhere and developing countries don't have a choice. Hundreds of millions of people face hunger, and consumers are confronting a global cost of living crisis, and they will pay the price.
Turkey also remains hopeful the grain deal can be revived.
Despite today's statement, I believe that the President of the Russian Federation, my friend Mr. Putin, wants this humanitarian bridge to continue.
With wheat prices already rising, the EU and the United States are among a growing chorus of countries urging Russia to reconsider.
I asked DW correspondent Matthias Berlinger in Kyiv how Ukraine could possibly keep up the transport of grain despite Russia pulling out of the deal.
So there has been a precedent for that. Last year, Russia suddenly withdrew from the deal after an attack by Ukraine on Russia's navy, and Ukraine just continued sending out ships via the same route, via the same procedures, and then Russia joined in again after a very short period of time. So something in that direction might be planned by Ukraine. Of course, the main question that to solve then would be the insurances, because insurance companies might withdraw from insuring these ships, and in that case, last time Ukraine has guaranteed the insurance via its state budget, and that might be the case again. Ukraine has hinted at that they want Turkey to be part of this scheme, which would, of course, hopefully, that's what Ukraine hopes, provide additional security guarantees, because, of course, the idea is that maybe Russia would not attack these ships if Turkey was on board this scheme, and that's something that it seems they're trying to figure out yet. But basically the idea is to call Russia's withdrawal a bluff.
Got it. We understand that Russia launched overnight airstrikes on several parts of Ukraine, including the Black Sea port cities of Mykolaiv and Odessa. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this was expected as a retaliatory measure for the blast on the Crimea bridge yesterday that damaged this bridge that's vital for the Russian supplies. It's also probably no coincidence that these drones and missiles were launched at port infrastructure. There was damage in a port in Odessa. The authorities have said that was from fallen debris, but we don't know the details. The ports are, of course, many things happening in the ports, including access, are of course classified. But that would also hint at Russia, reinforcing its point about withdrawing from the grain deal.
Matthias Berlinger in Kyiv. Many thanks, Matthias. Russia's decision to let the grain deal expire has provoked criticism from numerous world leaders, including from Germany's foreign minister. Annalena Baerbock delivered harsh words for Russia at the UN. DW's Washington bureau chief Ines Pohl spoke to her in New York.
Minister Baerbock, you called on Vladimir Putin to stop weaponizing hunger, just as he withdrew from the Black Sea grain initiative. This needs a quick fix to stop more people from starving. What is the most likely way out of this?
The common call, and the world made this call today. Here in New York, at the United Nations, every delegate from every country was totally shocked that Putin stopped this grain initiative again, because people could feel all around the world how much the grain from Ukraine is needed, has been needed over the last months. It was 32 million tons of grain going to around 45 countries in the world, and therefore misusing this grain, using hunger as a weapon, again, we have to say, was really a shocking result in the morning. And therefore, the pressure here is highly needed, the pressure on Russia that the grain from Ukraine can go to the world again.
And what can be done now?
I believe that the most successful is that really countries from Africa, countries from Latin America, from Asia address Putin directly. We have seen in the last year that it makes it different if also other countries in the world, not only European countries, are calling on Putin. And as he is using actually the most vulnerable in the world within this war by not letting the food to go to them, this is also addressing them, and therefore this common international call is, in my point of view, so important. On the other hand, we as Europeans have said from the beginning on, we cannot rely only on Putin's goodwill. Therefore, the EU intensified the solidarity lines, meaning bringing the grain out via rail and also cargo ships at the Danube River to the rest of the world. And we have to intensify these exports as we have done already in the past, so we are getting independent from the changing mood of the Russian president.
And you can find that interview with the German foreign minister in full on our DW News YouTube channel. Now, the end of the Black Sea grain agreement has raised grave concerns across the African continent. The Black Sea Grain Initiative had helped feed people in countries like Somalia, where failed rains and internal conflicts had hampered access to wheat. Cereal grains are a staple in many African countries, and the grain deal had helped reduce their price. Humanitarian agencies are also reliant on Ukrainian grain to feed people in countries suffering conflict or natural disasters. Experts have warned that the Horn of Africa will be hit hard without Ukraine's imports. I'd like to welcome and get more now from Nana Ndeda. She is in charge of humanitarian advocacy and policy at Save the Children in Nairobi. Ms. Ndeda, thank you for your time. I want to start by asking you which African countries are likely to be affected the most by the collapse of the grain deal?
As you said earlier, countries that are already at risk of severe food insecurity in the Horn of Africa, countries like Somalia and Ethiopia and Kenya, as well as countries in the Sahel that have continuously had food insecurity and have relied on international grain supply or international aid assistance for the survival of millions of people will be impacted by the grain deal not being in existence now. Many, many more countries that are heavily reliant on wheat imports from Russia and Ukraine, countries including Egypt that have high percentage of their grain coming out of the Black Sea are going to have a really hard time feeding communities, and we will see more children going hungry. We will see more women not being able to feed their families.
People in the Western world and the developed world in general are always hearing these stories of hardship coming from this region. But give us some real perspective. How big a problem is food security in those places right now?
In many parts of this continent, there is many millions of children that are severely malnourished. And malnutrition comes from extended food insecurity for those children, meaning they've not had food or nutritious food in that matter for a very long time. What we know is malnutrition has impacts on these children, not just in their current state. It is threatening their lives, but it is also threatening their futures. So they grow up susceptible to diseases, they grow up susceptible to long-term development challenges. Children are increasingly dropping out of school because they have no access to food. We are seeing families making very difficult choices about how they feed their families. They are skipping meals. Many are skipping meals because they cannot afford basic meals. And there is increasing numbers of children and communities that are now growing hungry. The trend of hunger within this region has increased drastically over the last few years.
You're talking about generational impacts here. We only have half a minute, but I do want to ask you, where can the countries that currently rely on Ukraine and Russia for their grain turn to now?
Unfortunately, that we will go back to depending on international aid assistance for a lot of countries. As hunger becomes more, countries will need to ask for assistance from the global West in order for them to feed their communities. And for humanitarian actors like Save the Children, the caseload for children who will come in malnourished or who will come in severely sick because of lack of food will become much more, and we will turn to the West for assistance. We cannot let this be the norm.
And we will have to end it there. Our thanks to Nana Ndeta from Save the Children in Nairobi.
Thank you.